would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California. Member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to Friday, October 28th, 2016. We are quickly creeping up on Halloween, and I hope everyone has some fun plans. I'm still trying to figure if I'm going to do anything just Halloween-y on Monday. We'll see. I can't think of anything particularly sexy. Never can tell what I might come up with at the last minute, though. So we'll just keep it as a surprise. Of course, the absolute best way to reach out is going to be at the website. That's therebelbroker.com. Some new changes, as I mentioned yesterday. I actually got it all implemented sooner than I thought. I know I had said you might not see it until the end of the weekend, but I buckled down yesterday and got the store up. So right now, it is primarily focused on real estate books. So in one section, you can simply peruse the entire Amazon library of real estate related books, which is great. If you're interested in shopping for anything relating to Amazon, please do it through the store, because at the same time you're doing your wonderful things with Amazon, you'd be supporting the show. It doesn't cost you anything extra. It just gives you that side benefit of helping the show out. So that would be deeply appreciated. But one section in there that might interest you more than others is going to be the Rebel Broker Library section, which is going to be books that are actually in my library. And I'm going to include specific notations for some of them about my thoughts on those specific books. There's a couple in there that are books I reread actually fairly frequently. Anything basically by Ken McElroy are ones I read all the time. His books are great. We can talk about why he's so great at some other time, but it's still a work in progress. I am one of those guys who has managed to accumulate way more real estate related books than I should. So I'll be slowly adding them all to the list. But for right now, you can find them over at the Rebel Broker. Just click on the menu item for the store, and then you'll be taken right to the page for that. So feel free to jump in, take advantage of it, and you can use it to buy whatever you want to buy at Amazon. It's specifically geared right now towards books. I believe also Kindle books will show up as options if you're someone who likes to read your materials on whatever, an iPad or a Kindle reader, whatever you might be using. I know that's kind of the direction I've gone over the last few years. But there's also going to be a section just of random stuff that I recommend. And right now there's a goofy real estate mug because I happened to see it and thought it was kind of neat. But then also stuff that could be helpful for you as a property owner, whether you're someone who wants to have a lockbox stashed somewhere on your property with keys in it so that you can facilitate folks getting access to it, or you're someone who's interested in jumping in and maybe getting some of that automated home stuff going on. There's the lock I actually bought from my house is there, so you can take a look at that and see if it's something that fits your needs. But you can do all of those wonderful things, take care of stuff for yourself, but then also support the show. Of course, at the site, you'll also find a red button at the top of the page titled Take the Survey to Support the Show. By participating in that, you'll be entering yourself into a $50, into the drawing to get a $50 gift card for Amazon. So feel free to go in there. Both times you're asked, simply provide the same email address and then answer the questions, and you will be included in the drawing. We've already had a drawing for October. We're going to have another one in November. And you'll, of course, be included in that. And I'd like to thank everyone who's participated. I've had actually a pretty steady and consistent amount of folks coming along each day and taking advantage of that. So thank you very much for doing that. And then, of course, finally, you can reach me by clicking on Contact the Rebel Broker or email the Rebel Broker. Send along any ideas, suggestions, observations, questions, whatever you might have. I'll be happy to respond as soon as I can. If you'd prefer to email me directly, just send those to therebel@therebelbroker.com. And finally, if you'd like to join the Rebel Underground, just text the word Rebel Broker to the number 44222. That's the word Rebel Broker. Text it to the number 44222. Follow the prompts, and you will be added to the Rebel Underground, which gets you access basically to stuff ahead of everybody else, and also exclusive items that'll only be offered to folks that are in that group. So feel free to join in there. In other news, I am sort of making my way towards finally delivering on my promises relating to some YouTube or at least video content of the process of going through and analyzing a property using the investment analysis tool, the property analysis tool that I use. I had thought that I'd settled on that, but quickly discovered that it wasn't going to work out the way I wanted it to. So I had to go back to the drawing board and find a new tool to do that. And I have. So I'll be getting my hands on that over the next couple of days, and then work will resume on putting that together for you. It's amazing how much time it takes to put this stuff together. So I apologize for how long it has taken, but at least we're making some progress on it now. I think that's it. Is that all the casual update stuff? I think it is. One item for today's show that I wanted to hit on that I think could make condos a little bit more interesting or a little bit more possible for a lot of folks, depending on what you want to do with them. This is an article that comes to us from the Housing Wire folks, and it's about changes to part of the Housing Opportunity through Modernization Act of 2016, and it has some pretty interesting effects. Now, we've talked a bit about some of the weird financing stuff that has changed over the last few months, and we talked about how credit ratings are being readjusted, and now what we have is under the FHA's new rules, approved condominium developments must have under the current rules, not under the new rules that are changing, but under the current rules, approved condominium developments have to have a minimum of 50% of the units occupied by owners. Now, the new rules, which go into effect immediately, would lower this requirement to 35% for existing condo developments, provided the project meets certain conditions, according to the FHA. While having too few owner occupants can detract from the viability of a project, requiring too many can harm its marketability, the FHA said in a statement. Quote, it is FHA's position that owner occupants serve to stabilize the financial viability of the projects, and are less likely to default on their obligations to homeowner associations than non-owner occupants. For some condominium projects, the existing owner occupancy requirement is necessary to maintain the stability of FHA's Mutual Mortgage Insurance Fund. Let's see. Here's some other extractions here. Applications must be submitted for processing and review under the HUD review and approval process. Financial documents must provide for funding of replacement reserves for capital expenditures and deferred maintenance in an account representing at least 20% of the condo development's budget. No more than 10% of the total units can be in arrears, more than 60 days past due, on their condominium association fee payments. 3 years of acceptable financial documents must be provided. So as long as it makes it through those hoops, that means you are suddenly able to purchase in a community where only 35% is owner occupied. And that's a gigantic shift. And that's going to dramatically increase the number of condominium setups that are going to be eligible for you to borrow using FHA loans. And I think, it's a tough one to call. I mean, in general, that my stand is usually less interference or involvement of the government and FHA and Fannie and Freddie into these sorts of things. But we live in a world where those things exist. So then the question sort of becomes, are we making things better or worse based on the level of risk that we're having basically the government, meaning you and me, taxpayers, assume? What I'm concerned about is these are less rigorous rules than we had prior to the downturn. And we've sort of made the rules in all sorts of segments less rigorous than they were before the downturn. Even in the world of lending, right? We've already talked about that. In addition to sort of reintroducing a lot of subprime style lending, we've now actually screwed around with the credit rating process so that it these scores that folks can get will be artificially higher than they would normally. We already talked about that, and it's not even a question of whether or not that was the intended purpose. The stated purpose was to facilitate more unqualified people to get qualifying numbers. So what they did is they made it possible to get a higher credit score without changing how we interpret those credit scores. In other words, it's assumed that you are just as much of a risk if you were rated as a 720 5 years ago and as if you rated a 720 today, whereas that 720 today probably actually equals a 680 or a 690 credit score. So, these are what's interesting is that's not even up for debate. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not a theory. That is exactly what they're doing. So my concern is that we are recreating through slightly different means the exact same set of circumstances that set us up for such a huge failure in terms of the downturn of 2006 through 2008, where all that stuff really sort of came to a head. And if you've been a listener for a while, you know that this is simply one brick in that wall. I got a funny email from a listener today. From Scott, our buddy Scott Blasius up in Sacramento, also a real estate agent up there. I've given his contact information before for those of you who are shopping for real estate in Sacramento. Look him up. He always has a stinger for me, and he was giving me a hard time for not a hard time. He was giving me a gentle prod for using the words dovetail and what was the other one? Suss out. So I'm finding myself I've got my thesaurus out trying to come up with synonyms for a dovetail. Anyway, sorry, I have no idea why I brought that up. But in any event, this is stuff that kind of concerns me. When we take all of this as a whole and we look at what the marketplace is doing, not just domestically, but international, right? Deutsche Bank, if you want to find out crazy stuff and get really paranoid, Google Deutsche Bank derivatives and credit default swaps now is the new one you can do, because credit default swaps about what's going to happen with Deutsche Bank. Credit default swap is basically when you're making it an investment that assumes the devaluation of something, right? We talked about credit default swaps back a lot relating to the subprime secondary mortgage market, where folks were suddenly betting those were going to lose money, and those folks the folks who bet against them made tons and tons of money. There was a lot of that. And we found out later that a lot of these folks were intimately involved with these institutions. They were betting were going to fail. But in any event, when you start to see that kind of stuff, when you start to see the folks at the top of the food chain in terms of banking, in terms of investment instruments, doing all of these things, I think that's a reason to worry. We talked the other day about how we had a jump in the number of all cash purchases, which I believe is fueled not so much by investors as it is simply folks with lots of money who aren't real estate investors relocating their cash into things that they think will likely serve as a better investment than stocks. And why do they think that? Well, because there's a really good chance the Fed is going to increase interest rates, and that's going to kill the stock market. We're already seeing the stock market getting hit in quite a few interesting ways right now. So once you start stirring this pot, and once you start seeing each one of these actions that fall under the category of making it easier to buy, and I'm not suggesting it needs to be complicated to buy, but when it makes it easier by reducing the rigorousness of the qualifications, or by redefining what it means to be qualified, by making the numbers we rely on easier to artificially increase, I think that's all worrisome stuff. And again, what we're doing is creating more buyers at a time when the inventory problems seem to be the biggest issue. Now, what's the biggest twist potentially in what we're about to experience, I think, is this idea that there are so many rentals via apartments that are going to come online. I've talked a lot about the local truth here. I've talked about the tons and tons of rental. It's hard to call them anything other than a rental campus because they're so gigantic. But these huge developments of rentals, of apartment complexes right along the 85 freeway in southern San Jose is a really good example. I came across another one just south of where Moffett Field is on the 101. So just as you start to head into Sunnyvale, there's another gigantic, what looks like rentals. I'm guessing those are going to be apartments, but it's a huge development. So I'm anxious to see what that does. Does that make people leave single-family residentials in favor of going back into an apartment-style living simply to save money since rents are so crazy here? It's going to be interesting to see. But in any event, or does it encourage? Does somehow that offset the market in some other way? I'm anxious to see what happens with it. But anyway, all right, folks, we're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about this and other fabulous real estate things that you can bounce around in your head over the weekend. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We've been talking about some modifications that are happening to what the FHA requires for condominium developments. It's going to allow you the flexibility to potentially make these purchases using FHA where you previously couldn't because of occupancy requirements, as long as it meets some other requirements in terms of reserves and other types of things. So just keep that in mind. I think it's going to very broadly increase the number of potential units that folks will be able to buy using these more aggressive lending tools. And remember, FHA, we're talking 3% down. So it's another one of those loans that I think is particularly risky at a time where I think there's a very reasonable expectation that we could see a drop in property values brought on by pick your list, right? Just if you've only been listening to this show for 3 weeks, 2 weeks, you've pretty much gotten some pretty good summaries on a lot of the crazy things that are going on in the world right now that could potentially impact our real estate market. So happy times. I wanted to touch on a couple of more things before we called it a day today. One is the consumer confidence numbers, which really took a hit in October. Quote, consumers are less confident about the economy in October than last month, citing that, among other things, business conditions are bad, according to the Consumer Confidence Survey conducted by the Conference Board by Nielsen. The index decreased to 98.6, down from September's post-recession high of 103.5. The present situation index decreased from last month's 127.9 to 120.6, and the expectations index decreased from 87.2 to 83.9. Let's see. Consumer confidence retreated in October after back-to-back monthly gains, according to Lynn Franco, the Conference Bureau Director of Economic Indicators. Consumers' assessment of current business and employment conditions softened, while optimism regarding the short-term outlook retreated somewhat. If we look at some other numbers, sort of anecdotally, I mean, you can look at this in your own communities. Here in California, or here in the Silicon Valley area, I have heard of several different layoff scenarios that have been occurring. The one at Twitter made a big splash. Some folks wanted to act like the Apple situation relating to them abandoning their driverless car program was a loss of headcount. It really wasn't. There was about 1,000 people who were simply reabsorbed into other parts of Apple. I did hear that some of those folks ended up losing their positions, but it was a relatively small number. I've also heard of several other high-tech companies that have either laid off or begun hiring freezes. Now, why do I bring that up? Because this is what happened before the last downturn. The last downturn was preceded by much more common information floating around about big companies going into hiring freeze mode, going into a mode of not expanding and kind of hoarding cash a little bit. So again, it's all about that deja vu all over again feeling. And so much of this is happening, no matter what kind of different things we talk about. Granted, sometimes you have to sort of realize that doing the exact same thing again doesn't always make sense, although that doesn't seem to stop folks who are managing the lending process. But they are trying some new and innovative ways to do the exact same stupid things they did before, just under a slightly different name. Consumers who say business conditions are good decreased from 27.7 to 26.2, and those saying conditions are bad increased from 15.8 to 17.7. They're also less optimistic about the labor market, with 24.3% saying jobs are plentiful compared to 27.6 last month. Those who said jobs are hard to get, however, declined slightly from 22.3 to 22.1. So I'd almost call that a wash. It's got to be within the margin of error of the survey. Looking ahead, consumers were not very optimistic about the market in the short term. Those saying they expect business conditions to improve over the next 6 months decreased from 17 to 16%, and those saying conditions would worsen increased from 10.8 to 12.2. So now one reason why we care about this is it's a way to sort of take the pulse of the future market. How aggressive, and I like to get these numbers particularly at this time of year, and it gets to be more important as we move into the very first month of 2017, because we want to try and get an expectation of how excited are folks going to be for the quote-unquote opening of the market. Right now in my area, the best time to quote unquote list your house is to do that in May. And that tends to be when you get the highest, statistically, it tends to indicate the time when you're going to get the highest price for your home when you list in May. And what'll happen this year? How aggressive? Usually you can anticipate in a higher level of activity in the marketplace based on things like this, about the general confidence of the folks. And because in order to feel good about going in and making a purchase like this, you need to feel confident about your job and your income over the next year, those types of things. So those are things that can have a direct effect on us, right? In terms of our expectations of the marketplace, how we might be received. If we're sellers, how many buyers and how out to get a property they're likely to be. And versus sellers, how confident are sellers that their prices will be sustained in the marketplace. And if not, maybe sellers will be more aggressive in being willing to sell their property in a faster period of time because they might be afraid that they're hitting the peak, right? If sellers are convinced that they're at the peak and things are going to get worse, that can also kick off some selling on the part of some sellers. But again, remember the dynamic we talked about before there is all sellers are buyers, right? If you're selling here, you're buying somewhere else. So I think one problem that we get into is if those folks also perceive that the buying situation is ridiculously nuts, which it has been over the last couple of years, those folks aren't going to list. They're going to say, forget it. We'll stay in the house we're in. We'll stand pat. We'll push through and try to survive. Because they're not confident they'll be able to buy what they need to buy at the rate that they need to buy it. And so the activity we tend to see is folks who are moving to far less expensive places to live. And that was a lot of my clients this year, to be super honest. My last ones no, those weren't my last ones. My last ones 2 ago were the folks who were moving to New Jersey, and they were literally moving from the most expensive place to the least expensive place. So for them, it was a fantastic trade in terms of what they were going to be able to buy on the other end. Okay. So let's come up with a creative solution, right? We've sort of analyzed confidence might be challenged. It'll be interesting to see how this trend continues. Have we reached a pivot point with confidence in that now that we saw it kind of heading on the upward trend for a couple of months, now that we've seen it sort of turn a corner, is that going to continue? Do we continue to see it decline? That could be an indicator of what sort of market activity we're going to see at the beginning of next year. Where do we go for the higher confidence levels? Where do we want to switch our gaze? Well, apparently, pot is one of the places where we can do it. This comes to us from CNBC, how pot is firing up this real estate. The hottest outgrowth of the pot economy, highly lucrative for both investors and cannabis companies. The industrial real estate that houses pot production is in high demand, and it is about to become the first opportunity for investors large and small to get in on marijuana. The first ever, this is nuts, kind of nuts in an awesome way. The first ever cannabis REIT or real estate investment trust filed to go public last week, and it is in talks to acquire its first property in New York State for $30 million, according to a prospectus. So clearly what this is going to be, it's going to be agricultural land that's well suited to the growing of cannabis. And I don't know, there's something about that I find funny. I'm not sure why. And for those of you who don't know, cannabis isn't just called weed for fun and giggles. It's a weed. It just grows. You plant that stuff and it grows. It's not one of those things that requires a ton of horticultural experience, particularly when you're not forced to grow it in the basement with grow lights. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Innovative Industrial Properties, a newly formed corporation, will... I don't know why this tickles me so much. Why do I find this so funny? Innovative Industrial Properties, a newly formed corporation, will focus on buying the properties of specialized industrial medical cannabis facilities. That will provide the cannabis growers and sellers with plenty of capital. The REIT, in turn, will offer the cannabis companies leaseback deals so no one has to move. As the appetite for cannabis grows... That's funny because you get hungry when you smoke cannabis, right? And you know they're making that joke, knowing they're making that joke. As the appetite for cannabis grows, so too can the profits for the REIT, which will collect rent as well as benefit from increasing property values. And I also find it interesting that all the photos on this article, well, okay, the one photo I'm looking at for this article, it shows inside growing of cannabis, which is kind of interesting. Quote, our real estate investments will consist of primarily properties suitable for cultivation and production of medical use cannabis, company executives wrote in the prospectus filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission on October 17th. And I get one thing that I guess makes that I find funny about this is it's totally skipping the whole little guy farmer who's going to grow his cannabis and jumping right to huge industrial style growing of cannabis. We don't get to have that whole American Gothic moment with the painting with the guy with the pitchfork and the dowdy looking wife with pot growing to 10 foot high behind him in that painting we've all come to know and love. Anyway, the company's executive chairman, Alan D. Gold, is a 30-year veteran of the real estate industry and co-founded two New York Stock Exchange listed REITs, Biomed Realty Trust and the Alexandria Real Estate Equities. His experience in both real estate and biomed were attractive to the principals at the first cannabis company planning to sell to the REIT. Let's see here. Is there anything else sexy in this? Cannabis has already dramatically boosted the warehouse business in Colorado, where marijuana is legal for both medical and recreational use. Vacancies in the sector are way down and rents are up, with 25 states already allowing some form of cannabis use and 9 other states with cannabis measures on the ballot this November. Investing in cannabis-based real estate would seem like a no-brainer, but as with any investment, there's always the possibility of a downside. Now, of course, federal law is still not too pleased with cannabis. So in other words, all of these approaches that you're seeing are all going to be phrased as medical applications, simply because I'm guessing that's the only way they can get around the federal regulations relating to marijuana. So that'll be an interesting one to suss out. So how do you take advantage of this? Is this something that you can actually benefit from? Well, if you can identify the most attractive areas to cannabis growers in your area or in your state and sort of jump in on that and start buying property, you very well may. I know folks who have actually made the trek up to Humboldt County here in California. For those of you who don't know, back in the days when it was still taboo to be growing pot, Humboldt was where it was all happening. And you had more dreadlock befestooned dudes and dudettes driving around in really expensive BMWs in these little one-horse towns in Humboldt than anywhere else in the country, because there was a ton of grass getting grown up in Humboldt County. And actually, a lot of folks are worried about that because the illicit market for marijuana has been very sustaining in Humboldt. So they're going to have to make this transition into the well-lit world of medical marijuana. But what's really funny is I honestly think this is something where someone who just owns acres of land that might be appropriate for this kind of work could absolutely make money on this without doing a dang thing. Think about it. You own the land. You just basically sharecrop it out to a company like this and say, grow marijuana on my land, and you owe me money for doing that. That's a pretty great business opportunity for you if it's something you can manage. So if you already hold property, great. I think in a lot of areas, this ship may have already sailed. But if you're interested in figuring out some really awesome areas for this, I can't think it's going to be too hard to find some enthusiastic member of your social circle who enjoys a little marijuana now and then, and ask them, well, where do they grow marijuana in our state? And then see what it might cost to potentially get land that would be very good for that purpose, and then get yourself involved in this. I mean, it's not something I'm going to pursue, I don't know, but it seems like an opportunity. Is there a risk because there's no real way of telling how much growth there's going to be in terms of the transition from medical to recreational? Yeah. However, I'd be willing to bet that that's pretty much a foregone conclusion. That's going to happen. So you may disagree with me, but I'm pretty confident in that. If the only investment opportunity available to me was that, I would do it. Simply because I think that the path is really already laid before us. The public opinion part of it's over. It's really just a question of everyone sort of getting on board and realizing that it's already happening. And now you can't even get any good PR busting people relating to marijuana anymore because the public sees it in a new light. So I think the level of risk you're taking there is relatively minor. So there you go. I'm trying to think of something really witty to say about marijuana, and I'm coming up blank. Maybe it's just a little too late. It's a little later than usual for today's show, so I apologize for that. I like to bring my full-on wittiness to the show every now and then, and I'm a little sad that I have a topic like this and I can't come up with anything. All right, folks, I hope that's somehow been valuable information. I do try to live up to my personal goal of, if you're willing to spend time on my show, I should be absolutely dedicated to providing you some value in return. Not sure if a pocket full of marijuana-related real estate ideas qualifies. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the condo thing was a good value add for you today. I hope so. Either way, I absolutely appreciate you taking the time out to listen to the show. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you all next time. Have a great weekend, and enjoy your Halloween.